Hey all, I am re-recording this again because apparently my recording the first time did not take. So yeah, that didn't annoy me at all. I'm at home with a cold right now, so my voice is really fabulous and nasally, and you can also hear my cat crying in the background. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into the Roaring Twenties. The armistice ending World War I was 2 years in the past, in November 1920, when the American people, women as well as men, went to the polls to cast their votes for president. Their choice was between two men: Governor James Cox, a Democrat who urged the adoption of the League of Nations, and Senator Warren G. Harding, a Republican who was unclear about where he stood on basically every issue. The only memorable phrase in Harding's campaign was his assertion that American people wanted a, quote, return to normalcy, end quote. Normalcy, by the way, was a word that Harding just completely made up. Apparently he was right, though, because he was elected by a landslide. It was a sign that the idealism and activism that had characterized the pre-war years of the Progressive Era were over. During the 1920s, three Republican presidents would control the executive branch. Congress, too, was solidly Republican through the decade. And in this decade, U.S. business boomed while farmers and unions struggled. The great leader of the progressive wing of the Republican Party, Theodore Roosevelt, died in 1919. Unlike the Republicans of the Gilded Age, however, Republican leadership in the 1920s did not preach laissez-faire economics, but rather accepted the idea of limited government regulation as an aid to stabilizing business, and the pursuit of profit took the lead in developing the economy. Warren G. Harding had been a newspaper publisher in Ohio before entering politics. He was handsome and well-liked among the Republican political cronies with whom he regularly played poker. His abilities as a leader, however, were less than presidential. When the Republican National Convention of 1920 deadlocked, meaning that they could not determine a party presidential candidate, the party bosses decided in a, quote, smoke-filled room, end quote, to deliver the nomination of Harding as a compromise choice. Harding recognized his limitations and hoped to make up for them by appointing able men to his cabinet. He appointed the former presidential candidate and Supreme Court Justice Charles Evan Hughes to be Secretary of State, the greatly admired former mining engineer and Food Administration leader Herbert Hoover to be Secretary of Commerce, and the Pittsburgh industrialist and millionaire Andrew Mellon to be Secretary of the Treasury. When the Chief Justice seat on the Supreme Court became vacant, Harding filled it by appointing former President Howard Taft, not pictured here. Harding did little more than sign into law the measures adopted by the Republican Congress. He approved a reduction in the income tax, an increase in tariff rates under the Fordney-McCumber Tariff Act of 1922, and the establishment of the Bureau of the Budget, which with procedures for all government expenditures to be placed in a single budget for Congress to review and vote on. So in that way, he approved this piece of legislation that tried to streamline the federal budget. Harding did surprise many people, particularly his conservative allies, by pardoning and releasing from federal prison the socialist leader Eugene V. Debs. You'll remember that Debs had been convicted of violating the Espionage Act during World War I. Though while he was in prison, I do just want to state this, Debs received 920,000 votes in the 1920 presidential election. Yes, Debs ran for president from prison. Harding's decision to pardon was prompted by the president's generous spirit. But seriously, Harding's post-war presidency was marked by scandals and corruption, similar to those that had occurred under early President Ulysses S. Grant. Having appointed some excellent officials, Harding also selected a number of incompetent and really dishonest men to fill important positions, including Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall and Attorney General Harry Daughtry. In 1924, Congress discovered that Paul had accepted bribes for agreeing not to prosecute certain criminal suspects. However, in August 1923, shortly before the scandals were uncovered publicly, Harding died suddenly while traveling in the West. And so, as a result, he was never implicated in any of the scandals. So Harding dies while in office, so his vice president, again according to the Constitution, steps up and serves as president. And vice president and successor Calvin Coolidge had won popularity in 1919 as the Massachusetts governor who broke the Boston police strike. So he's not really favorable towards labor. He was a man of few words who richly deserved the nickname Silent Cal. Coolidge once explained why silence was good politics. He said, "If you don't say anything, you won't be called on to repeat it." Also unanswerable was the president's sage comment, "When more and more people are thrown out of work, unemployment results." Yeah. Nice one, Coolidge. Okay, Coolidge summarized both his presidency and his era in the phrase, that the business of America is business. Less than a year in office, Coolidge was the overwhelming choice of the Republican Party and their presidential nominee in 1924. The Democrats nominated a conservative lawyer from West Virginia, a man by the name of John W. Davis, who tried to make an issue of the Teapot Dome scandal. Unhappy with conservative dominance of both parties, liberals formed a new progressive party led by presidential candidate Robert La Follette of Wisconsin. Coolidge won the election easily, but the progressive ticket did extremely well for a third party in a conservative era. La Follette received nearly 5 million votes, chiefly from discontented farmers and laborers. So why do we need to know about a party and a candidate that wasn't elected president? Well, the fact that there were enough people to form a third party, and that this, sorry, my cat's going crazy, and that this party won so many votes, basically running on a platform that was pro-farmers, pro-laborers, shows how there's kind of this growing divide within America. And that's very indicative of the 1920s. On one hand, you have all of these economic prosperity, and you have this boom, and people are excited that the war is over. Yay, America won. But then on the other hand, you kind of are seeing some cracks that are breaking through the facade, and that is going to lead to an unraveling in the 1930s. So again, this is just kind of setting up the stage for a bigger division that's going to come out later. So again, back to Coolidge. Like most Republicans at the time, he believed in a limited government that stood aside while business conducted its own affairs. Little was accomplished in the White House except keeping a close watch on the budget. Cutting spending to the bone, Coolidge vetoed even the acts of his own Republican majority in Congress. He would not allow bonuses for World War I veterans, and he vetoed a bill to help farmers as crop prices fell. We're going to come back to the presidencies of the Republicans during this time period when we talk about how they reacted to the economic crisis. And we will definitely revisit Coolidge's decision not to issue bonuses to World War I veterans later. Coolidge declined to run for presidency a second time. The Republicans therefore turned to an able leader with a spotless reputation, self-made millionaire and Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover. Remember, Hoover was the man who basically was able to get America, or he was seen as the man that was able to get America through World War I, strictly through persuasion, persuading people to grow victory gardens, to prevent the United States from having to go on a ration system. So he's very well liked, Herbert Hoover. And he had also served, he was very experienced. He'd served 3 presidents, Wilson, Harding, and Coolidge, in administrative roles, but he'd never campaigned for elected office. Nevertheless, in 1928, he was made the Republican nominee for president. Hoover's Democratic opponent was Governor of New York Alfred E. Smith. As a Roman Catholic and an opponent of prohibition, we'll talk more about prohibition later, Smith appealed to many immigrant voters in the city. However, many Protestants were openly prejudiced against Smith. Republicans boasted of Coolidge prosperity, which Hoover promised to extend. He even suggested, ironically, as it proved, that poverty would soon be ended altogether. Spoiler alert, we have the Great Depression coming up next during Hoover's presidency. A little bit embarrassing. Hoover won in a landslide and even took a large number of the electoral votes in the South. In several southern states, including Texas, Florida, and Virginia, the taste of prosperity and the general dislike for Smith's religion outweighed the voters' unusual allegiance to the Democratic Party. So it was a little bit surprising in the election of I just realized that on the slide it says the election of 1828, but that is definitely not what we're talking about. We're talking about the election of 1928. Sorry about that. So one of the significant things about this election of 1928 is that people who would normally vote Democrat, which would be a lot of the South, ended up moving to voting Republican during this election. So this is it for this video. Just kind of a brief primer about the presidents and some of their domestic policies during the 1920s. We're going to spend a lot more time discussing, or you guys are going to view a couple of videos where I'm going to talk more about the economy and the serious change in culture that happens during this time period. So stay tuned for that.